morning, everyone. Ladies and gentlemen, Honorable Secretary General, senior officials, distinguished guests, friends, welcome to Chengdu, Sichuan, China. My name is Stephen Creamer. I'm the director of the ICAO Air Navigation Bureau, and it's my honor to serve as your Master of Ceremonies today. Our conference, or our series of events this week in Unmanned Aircraft Week, have been hosted by the International Civil Aviation Organization in close partnership and with the generous hospitality of the People's Government of the Sichuan Province, and with the support of the Office of the China State Air Traffic Control Commission, the Civil Aviation Administration of China, and other relevant stakeholders in China. The conference began with the third remotely piloted aircraft systems symposium, or RPAS 3, over the past 3 days, exploring the theme from accommodation to integration. And now we're ready to kick off day one of the second ICAO Unmanned Aircraft System Industry Symposium, otherwise known as Drone Enable 2. For the next 2 days, the theme of our discussion will be UAS traffic management to ATM, transitioning from segregation to integration. As we get started, please remember, silence your cell phones and other electronic equipment that might prove to be a distraction, but otherwise, simply get ready for 2 very interesting days of presentations and dialogue regarding this important topic that we're excited to be able to host today. Please allow me to introduce the following distinguished guests. Of course, Dr. Fang Liu, the Secretary General of ICAO. And Mr. Shijun, the Chief Engineer of the Civil Aviation Administration of China. This week we are being joined by almost 600 participants overall during the week from the unmanned aviation world, and a few from the manned aviation world who are very interested in this topic as well, representing over 50 states from around the globe. And now let us welcome the ICAO Secretary General, Dr. Liu, to share her opening remarks.
Thank you, Steve. 尊敬的中国民航局应时军总工，尊敬的各位来宾、女士们、先生们，大家早上好。I'm delighted to welcome you here today to our second Drone Enabler event, focused on the theme of UTM to ATM, transitioning from segregation to integration. The aim of the 2 symposia this week is to help support and guide our continued work to address a comprehensive and harmonized framework to support UAS activities. We are here to listen to what you have to say and to learn more about what you are innovating and how you are moving this industry forward. As I'm sure you are all quite aware, the purposes and capabilities of UAS are multiplying almost daily as new uses for drones are researched and brought to market. Only a few weeks ago, for instance, I saw a report about a UK researcher who is exploring the viability of UAS to shepherd bird flocks in order to mitigate bird strike threats at major airports. This has already been put into practice in Canada at Edmonton International Airport. Truly, there is an almost limitless potential in this exciting domain of aviation innovation, And we are very excited to be working with you here in Chengdu to discover how US can bring further benefit to citizens and societies and industries all over the world. Any aircraft which is intended to be flown without a pilot on board is considered an unmanned aircraft per ICAO's international definition. This covers a rather broad range of aircraft types and in turn gets divided by us into several subcategories based upon the type of regulatory framework each requires, including the remotely piloted aircraft types. We just explored new developments on at RPAS 3. In parallel, we continue to witness the emergence of a range of new aviation activities being conducted in lower-level airspace, typically in urban or suburban environments. Most of these activities include the operation of small unmanned aircraft, commonly referred to as drones. Drones today are supporting an almost limitless range of operations, which expands almost daily. To cover just a few, we can appreciate their current applications for inspection, monitoring, emergency services, cargo delivery, and recreational activities. The competitive advantage of a small unmanned aircraft UA over traditional ground transportation modes, or manned aviation for that matter, is particularly strong in densely populated urban areas. When it comes to advancements in small unmanned aircraft operations, Asia and China in particular play an important role. According to industry studies, Chinese manufacturer DJI accounts for nearly 70% of the non-military small UAS market today and has seen revenues increase from just over $4 million to a staggering $1 billion in revenue between 2011 and 2015. Other regions are also seeing the rapid growth in this area, and while it is difficult to forecast the full economic impact of US until a harmonized regulatory framework is in place, there are a few eye-opening forecasts. For example, the European market is expected to be worth over 10 billion euros or 78 billion RMB yuan annually in 2035, and over 15 billion euros or 178 billion yuan annually by 2050. In the United States, meanwhile, the integration of US is forecast to support more than $13.6 billion or 94 billion yuan in economic activity in just the first 3 years of integration. At the same time, it expects over 100,000 jobs to be created in this field by 2025. What this helps to make clear for us is that these operations are expanding very dramatically, and that as the unmanned industry grows, so will the numbers of aircraft operating simultaneously within congested metropolitan areas and airspace. This is a tremendous challenge for regulatory officials and airspace planners, and one which will require completely new approaches when it comes to the management of air traffic. The UAS traffic management UTM concept, which ICAO is now developing, seeks to meet this challenge hand-on. It can be defined today as a system that provides traffic management through integration of human, information, technology, facilities, and services, supported by air and ground and or space-based communications, navigation, and surveillance. Two of the most important aspects of UTM are therefore the need for it to accommodate very high-density aircraft operations, as well as multitude of varying aircraft types and flight operations. And we must also take into account that airspace segment from ground level to upward of 1,000 feet is already an important operating environment for numerous low-flying helicopters and other manned aircraft. These are critical components in this issue and must absolutely be addressed and accounted for by any effective UTM system. At ICAO's last assembly in 2016, our member states drew attention to the rapid development of the various aviation technologies planning to operate in low-level airspace. They expressed broad support that ICAO should take a leadership role by assisting them in the development of materials to permit a harmonized approach internationally to regulating small unmanned aircraft. The growing importance of unmanned aviation is also being reflected in the agenda of ICAO's upcoming 13th Air Navigation Conference, which will be held at our headquarters in Montreal next month. Among the key objectives of the conference will be the ongoing development of operational solutions and guidance to support the safe and coordinated development of aviation activities at low altitudes. Special attention in this regard will be paid to urban and suburban environments, including those areas in and around the airports. This assembly request was quite unusual in that our member states were essentially requesting guidance on domestic operations, even though ICAO's mission and role has always focused on standards and recommended practices for international operations exclusively. This speaks very clearly to the fact that our sector has entered into a new era of air transport and aircraft development. And in order to facilitate this expansion of ICAO's work program, we took a similarly innovative and flexible approach. We have expanded the terms of reference for the ICAO UAS advisory group as an important first step, and since last year's iteration of this Joint Enabler Conference, there has been busy developing the first edition of the UTM Framework. You will hear much more about this later in the symposium. As we continue to move this file forward and UTM applications and operations continue to evolve, many further challenges will need to be identified and addressed. An important one among these will be convergence of UTM and ATM, which explains our second request for information, RFI, which has brought you all here today, along with the 48 proposals to be considered. These submissions were reviewed by the UAS advisory group, and those respondents that most effectively addressed this year's RFI Problem Statement will be discussing their activities and proposals as part of a combined panel session this afternoon. Particularly in urban and suburban areas, it is understood that without considering the surrounding ATM structure, a UTM system could not provide an effective capability. Additionally, any related framework will need to be made up of many separate components, and 3 of these were addressed at the Joint Enabler 1 last September as a matter of priority. One addressed the need for a registration system accessible in real time to allow remote identification and tracking of each UA, its operator owner, and the location of the remote pilot control station. The other 2 components addressed geofencing, like systems, and communication system. ICAO is seeking support of its member states to develop and deploy a global aircraft registration network which will facilitate the connectivity between national aircraft registries. This registry network will not only support RPA and other unmanned activities, but also manned aircraft registrations. You will hear about this tomorrow. Additionally, ICAO is in the process of developing a trust framework solution to permit the secure, timely, and accurate transition and storage of transmission and storage of aviation data for both manned and unmanned aviation on a global scale. This too will be discussed over the next 2 days. Finally, I would like to re-emphasize a point which was made during the opening of the RPAS 3 symposium, namely that unmanned aviation currently challenges many fundamental tenets of the existing international regulatory framework. A related concern surrounds UA operations over the high seas, which are increasingly carried out in activities such as oil platform and ship inspections, fishery resource monitoring and compliance, atmospheric research and weather measurement, search and rescue, and security operations. How can small, uncertificated, unmanned aircraft comply with the requirements of the Chicago Convention? Will they, for instance, possess and carry a certificate of airworthiness, a certificate of registration? Will they purposefully avoid the water surface or man-made structures? Again, considering the difficulty and in many cases impossibility for UA to comply with several of these mandates, the question arises as to the best method to resolve these issues. How we accomplish this? Significant work and bold thinking will be required, and we cannot simply ignore the existing aviation regulatory framework, given its proven and indeed exemplary safety record for manned operations. Over the next 2 days, you will be exposed to some of the best and brightest in the UTM domain. I challenge you to keep your minds open and to very actively participate in the panel and other discussions which will emerge. Together, we must explore the same pioneering spirit which has already helped to make you all leaders in this field. In closing now, ladies and gentlemen, let me please reiterate that in such a dynamic and innovative area of activity, which is such a continuous flow of emerging ideas and techniques, the UAS industry and regulatory communities must stay in close contact and work together to realize effective results. ICAO will continue playing the leadership role in this process, which world governments have asked us to fill, providing a forum with a very long and proven track record for effective and consensus-based global dialogue and harmonization in the service of practical and sustainable regulatory and non-regulatory solutions. Please let me wish you all a very productive and engaging next 2 days here at the Joint Enabler 2. And I will very much look forward to reviewing the results of what you achieve here in Chengdu. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Liu. And I'd like to publicly acknowledge your leadership from the perspective of the Air Navigation Bureau to support us as we've worked through this triennium, because as many of you in the ICAO world might be aware, there was no initial program funding designed to assist with this very unusual tasking that we have for small unmanned aircraft. But because of some innovative work that we've done in the Secretariat, we were able to provide that initial response and develop this drone-enable series of activities, as well as to do the collaboration with our partners around the world. And one of those key partners is our colleagues in the People's Republic of China and the Civil Aviation Authority of China. And as you've seen through the exhibitions and through the developments here in Chengdu or anywhere else that you travel in China, the development of the infrastructure and aviation capacity of this nation is breathtaking. So I can only imagine what a daunting task it must be to serve as the chief engineer for the Civil Aviation Authority of China. It's my pleasure to welcome Mr. Ying Shijun for his opening remarks.
尊敬的国际民航组织
in this seminar of our UAS drone enable the second session and listen to your experience and sharing and your opinions on the development of the UAS. And I believe that this seminar, this convention will make great contributions to China's as well as world's aviation development and has played a very significant role in this. So on behalf of the CAC, I want to extend a great thanks to ICAO to place this meeting to the location of our city of Chengdu and to provide a really great platform for us to sharing experiences and to also look forward together with stakeholders. We also extend a great thank you to Sichuan province for your great assistance in organizing this convention, and I also want to extend a warm welcome to all of the guests coming to attend this great convention, and also thank you all for your concern and support in our event. With AI, information technology, big data, cloud computing, this kind of maturing of the technologies, the UA industry has nurtured itself and evolved, especially the lightweight, small-scaled UA. No matter its quality and quantity, it has soared in recent years. At the same time, the complexity it ushered into our era has also posed challenges to us. Therefore, with collaborations with international organizations, our cooperations has gone into a deeper level, and we also explored the possibilities and implement what we have discussed in September last year. Drone enable the first drone enable in Montreal, Canada. We also participate in that event as well. And it is our great pleasure to participate drone enable the second here in the city of Chengdu and to adjust our existing supervision framework to meet the great demand of the huge activities posed by the UA. On one hand, it represents the safety issues which ICAO has attached to the UA industry, and also its concerns for a smooth integration for the UA to the aviation industry. I hope that, and I believe that all the representatives from the international organizations as well as guests from the industry will share your opinions and your forward-looking and blueprints for the UA industry, and I believe this will all provide very great lessons for China's development in this era and industry. In this industry, the UA manufacturing and application is a key role key industry for China, and the CAC, as the administration of the civil aviation, we take the responsibility to provide management, supervision, and service to this industry. And for a long time, the CAC has adopted an open attitude to show great support in this industry, and we have carried out great measures to promote this. On one hand, we have comprehensively participated in promoting the temporary guidelines on the UA legislation, and also have helped to make breakthroughs in legislations in this era to strengthening the management and the law and the regulations in this industry. And we also have enhanced our efforts to the technological supervision through collecting and issuing 173 data on the obstacles control. In China, we have established e-sharing platforms for industries to get this kind of data to provide airworthiness. And in China, we have actually initiated a system, a real-time registration system on the UA industry, and the registration has amounted to 220,000 by now. At the same time, the CAC has also promoted the training and the certification for the UA pilots to make the users to have a good understanding about law and regulations and promote safety issues and avoid negative effects. On the safety front, we have till now have get our work done in the airworthiness research and has conducted collision testing of UA and other aviation aircraft, provide a strong technological support. And many cases to share with you that CAC has adopted a pilot zone for UA operation, and we have approved Shunfeng and Jingdong's pilot point in Ganzhou and Shanxi. We also provide many of the pilot points in Shenzhen as well. So facing these new challenges with the environment of the UA, we will stick to the principles, have the attitude of a tolerance and precautious and proactive attitude to promote the research and development, and ways to promote the collaborations between universities, research institute, as well as the industry to meet all these problems and facing these challenges. I believe with our joint efforts and with our sincere and warm discussions, this convention, this meeting will become an important platform to provide a solid foundation for the development in this industry and strengthen strategic cooperation, and to provide a sustainable and healthy and long-term momentum for the UA industry. So, my sincere wishes to a successful meeting on the drone-enabled thing, and I believe that this goal will be realized because of you and your efforts here, and I hope you have good health and a smooth stay here in Chengdu. Thank you for listening.
I'd like to thank our two distinguished speakers for setting the scene for us today. UAS is a component, a smaller component of a much, much larger system, but clearly a component that will have enormous importance moving forward for aviation and for society at large. So we have a very exciting program over the next 2 days, and to set the stage for the detail, it's my pleasure to introduce Ms. Leslie Cary, who, for most of you in the UAS and RPAS world, needs no introduction. But for those of you who aren't, it's a pleasure to introduce her. She is the chief of the RPAS section of the International Civil Aviation Organization. She's been leading ICAO's work on unmanned aviation for over 10 years. First as the Secretary of the Unmanned Aircraft System Study Group, which pioneered ICAO's work on RPAS in the early days, as well as its successor, the RPAS panel, which now meets as frequently as 3 or 4 times a year to develop standards and practices for RPAS. Ms. Cary began her career as an air traffic controller with the FAA and continued with her work at ICAO in policy. Leslie, the floor is yours.
Hi, good morning, everyone, and welcome back for the second part of our week on unmanned aviation. Last week we heard, or the last few days, we heard about the RPAS side of this activity, and now we're going to break into the smaller arena of what we are commonly referring to as drones at ICAO. So with Drone Enable, we really set this up to try and bring industry into the discussion, put industry at the forefront, since that is where all the innovation is occurring. So we opted to have this new type of program where we hear directly before we start trying to build regulations or the regulatory framework. So I'm just going to give a bit of an overview as to what's been going on at the ICAO level. Now, as most of you are well aware, our role at ICAO is to develop the international harmonization, the international framework of regulations that are implemented nationally so that we can have a common understanding of the aviation system. So we're looking at regulations that will support both the design and manufacture, as well as the airspace management, how all of this is going to play out between the many stakeholders involved in civil aviation. And at the forefront of that, we always have our key issues: safety, security, efficiency, and sustainability of the aviation system. Now, regulators have a bit of a challenge on their hand, trying to figure out what to do with all of this. Unmanned aviation, it comes in so many shapes and sizes, configurations, types of operations, where they're occurring. It is just an incredibly broad challenge for the regulators to address, which is part of the reason they came to us at ICAO saying, please help. Please bring everybody together and look for ways forward so that we don't each have to do this individually, even if it is much more of a domestic issue at the national level. So at ICAO, we've got our 2 streams of work. The last 3 days, we heard about RPAS and the full regulatory approach, how we're putting unmanned aircraft into the international framework for international instrument flight rules operations. Well, today and tomorrow, we're going to look at that other stream, the other UAS. But first, as a quick recap for those of you that were not here earlier in the week, the full regulatory approach, we're looking at things like how to do the certification requirements for international operations, the remote pilot license, which the standards were just adopted earlier this year by the Council of ICAO. Those are available now for voluntary use by states. They become mandatory in 2022. So there's time for the national implementations to occur. There will be guidance material coming out on that. We're also addressing airworthiness in the very traditional civil aviation approach, and requirements for RPAS operators, similar to the Air Operator Certificate in manned aviation. And we have quite a few people that are involved in this activity at ICAO. We meet 3 times a year, as Mr. Kramer was indicating, and we have about 100 to 120 people routinely show up for those meetings, all contributing into the development work. We also have a lot of other technical panels at ICAO that are contributing to the activity. whether it's frequency spectrum, aerodrome operations, safety management, separation standards, surveillance, communications, all of them are covered. And while there's been a little discussion of the various annexes we have at ICAO, each of these annexes touches a different discipline within civil aviation. And for years, I kept thinking that we only had to deal with 18 of the 19 annexes. So there was one we got to ignore. Unfortunately, with the introduction of things like solar-powered aircraft and electric aircraft, I have a feeling even that last holdout annex on units of measurement is going to be affected. So we are truly covering every single aspect of the international regulatory framework with this subject. Other activities at ICAO? The legal committee just met last week, and some of you heard of some of the outcomes from that earlier in the week from Christopher Petras. We also have the Aviation Environmental Protection Committee, which is looking at things like the noise and emissions from aircraft. And those are for aircraft, which means unmanned aircraft are included. They will be covered by these same requirements. Aviation Security Panel, of course, has an integral role to play in this. But as we were hearing earlier in the week, security is not just an external force. It's also something that has to be built into the systems. So we look at security both externally and internally and have different people working those. And services will be provided for, because we will have a lot of new things coming up. These panels as well are affected. Getting on more about the drone side of things. As a result of various near encounters, near misses, etc., that have taken place between manned aircraft and drones over the last few years, the whole subject of drones was brought to ICAO as a safety issue. And that is how we first started looking at it. What is it that regulators need to do in order to keep manned aircraft safe from drones? Well, that was before the assembly, where we were asked to expand our scope, not just to cover the safety of manned aircraft, but to cover a whole new regulatory framework for these small drones. And we're expecting that the 13th Air Navigation Conference, which is coming up next month, is going to reinforce and perhaps even expand a bit further what the states are hoping for ICAO to contribute to. Now, with our two approaches, the second stream on the other UAS, that's what this drone enable is about. What is essential for everybody to understand is that all of the principles of aviation regulation apply. It's just a case of how they apply. Airworthiness essentially comes down to making sure that aircraft operate as they are expected to in the air. They're not going to fall out of the sky. They will not inadvertently harm people. That still applies no matter whether it's an A380 or a DJI Phantom. They need to operate as intended. The rules of the air will apply. It's just on what scale will they apply? How do right-of-way rules apply when we're talking about drones? We need to have educated operators and remote pilots. So whether it's a teenager with a new drone that they've just received as a birthday gift, or a professional doing whatever type of activity, they need to have the proper education for what they're going to be doing. And safety is always critical, looking at what the risks are and mitigating those risks. Those risks are different if it's in a backyard, if it's over a crowd of people, or if it's anywhere near an airport with manned aircraft. So all of these things that apply, they just have to be scaled appropriately. Now we take the example of one single drone, but where it is used, how it is used, why it is used, will affect the type of regulations that will be needed for that particular operation. So it's not necessarily the drone itself, it's the drone and the location, the environment, and what it is doing. All of that has to come into play when we're talking about regulations for these small unmanned aircraft. Now, some of the other things that we have done so far at ICAO, we initially developed an online toolkit from the UAS advisory group. We asked the group of experts to come in and put together some general guidance for states that did not yet have any form of regulations in place, to give them some guidance on what to regulate and some best practices on how to go about doing that. That toolkit is available to anyone and everyone to go in online and look at. And we've been expanding the information contained on the toolkit through the Drone Enable program. So last year, when we were looking at a framework for UTM, and as the Secretary General brought up, the registration, identification, tracking systems, communications, and geofencing-like systems. All of these are fundamental to UTM, but they're also things that are fundamental to any national regulations on small unmanned aircraft. And this time, we're looking at how does UTM play together with ATM. After all, it's one single airspace. It's not two airspaces, one of which has manned aircraft and one which has unmanned aircraft. It's all one piece. So we need to have the UTM systems interoperable with ATM, but not all information needs to be shared. Some information has to pass between the two systems in order to maintain safety for all concerned. That's what we'll be hearing about. We will also have a presentation tomorrow afternoon on the aircraft registry network that we are developing at ICAO. We're hoping that that registry network provides a strong service to states as well as to operators and industry as a whole in order to share information from one state to another. As while most unmanned aircraft of this small category of drones don't cross international borders, they do operate internationally. They just cross borders in suitcases and cargo compartments. So the operations are international, just not usually crossing borders in the process. But what's next? This is going to be one of the interesting questions for us at our 13th Air Navigation Conference next month, because after all, the unmanned aviation industry is not stopping just with drones and remotely piloted aircraft. It is expanding in all sorts of new directions. We've had numerous questions come up, at least through the online app over the last few days, about air taxis. Who knows if ICAO, will this get added to our work program or not? We're waiting to see, as well as how autonomy and artificial intelligence and other such things come into play. So for now, we have our RPAS stream, we have our UAS toolkit, we're working on UTM and registration, but that whole bit about what is next, we're waiting eagerly to see what you have to say. So with that, thank you very much. And actually, I will just advise that we do have a coffee break. And if everybody would please come back at 11 o'clock, we can move right along into the main program. Thank you.